Hello and welcome back to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I am not sitting in front of my movie corner. I have my How Sharp Is Your Sword shirt on. I do not have a movie next to me because I'm visiting my girlfriend. And judging by the frame around me, we are back, taking down another atheist. Today, back on the chopping block is Viced Rhino and his video, The Bible Proves Jesus' Miracles Because It's in the Bible. Now, you'll notice that the frame has changed. I'm not using the YouTube video anymore because, well, the YouTube video kept doing advertisements. So I kept having to try to edit those out, and I got sick and tired of doing it. So I switched over to just what I normally do, which is download the video and then run the video as normal. So when last we left off, we were talking about the... we were talking about how this guy doesn't believe that Jesus' miracles really truly ever meant anything. And because he seems to think that, he seems to think that, it's like Jesus had to look at various, or that we have to look at various sources like the Bible very critically because in his mind there's no evidence to back up any of the miracles of Jesus' claim, despite the fact that we have a whole bunch of really interesting sources, including the Bible, that attest to Jesus' miracles. One thing is, as of the filming of this video, the descriptions in the videos will have changed by now, but I just wanted to mention this. I've put a Werner Wallace video down in the description, and I've updated some of the links and some of the various things as of filming this video. So I have a few new things there, a few new links in some different places. The purpose of this being that when we look at certain things, we have to look at, and this is one of the things that Werner Wallace mentions in the video, and it's basically what I've been saying, is we don't just read the story and then automatically believe it. We look at what are other people saying in the story, how is it that people are doing things, and Werner Wallace brings this up because he's talking to Frank Turek. Werner Wallace brings this up, the same thing that I've basically been saying throughout this whole entire series, which is, if you wanted to have a cult leader, if you wanted to have a person that was on a pedestal, you would not be putting in any opposing views to that person. That person would only be loved by everyone around him. Every person would be like, yes, that's the man. That's who we want. Instead, the Bible puts a lot of things, like one of the things that he uses is, like David, for instance. Like, David is not a person that you would want. If you idolized David, you would not want to put in, like, his infidelity with Bathsheba. You would not want to put in some of the things that his sons did. You would not want to put in some of the things that he did. Like when he took the census and then, because God didn't tell him to take a census. He was just very proud and he took the census and God punished him for it. So the point being that the Bible puts a lot of humanity behind the people. Okay, behind the stories of the people, to show you that sinning is going to happen, number one, and number two, that we have a loving God who still forgives when we repent from that sin. Because we see where, when kings, in like say, First and Second Kings, when after Solomon, when the kingdom divided, okay, into the northern and southern kingdoms, there was a massive, like like the kings would do bad things, and then there'd be like one king who would go down and cut down most of the Asherah poles and rip out all the the shrines to Molech, and they would tear down what was known as the high places, which were just altars that were sitting up on hills. And they would get rid of people, they would get rid of like the prophets, and they would get rid of all these other people. They'd get rid of the temple prostitutes. And they would do right in the eyes of the Lord. And so the Lord would delay his destruction of Israel up until Manasseh. Manasseh was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back at that point. I mean, God had been very patient all the way through Judges, all the way through 1st and 2nd Samuel and Chronicles. I mean, basically Chronicles just kind of tells the story of David. And kind of tells a little bit of the story of Saul, and it tells the story of David, and then it tells the story of Solomon in 2nd Chronicles, and then goes down through the divided kingdom to the exile. So essentially, those 6 books plus Judges, okay, you have a massive, massive amount of like kings and judges and people that did bad things in the eyes of the Lord. But it took from Judges all the way to the end of 2 Kings, where Manasseh was reigning, for God to decide to destroy Israel. And it's funny to me that, it's like people always say, oh, God, throws temper tantrums. Oh, God does this. Oh, God does that. And they fail to understand just how slow God is to anger. Okay? And so, like, now the judgment is coming. And it's been, and it's like those bumper stickers where it says, Jesus is coming back, and boy, is he mad. Oh, believe me, that bumper sticker ain't just whistling Dixie, folks. Okay? Jesus is going to come back, and when he does, you are going to want to be a Christian. You are not going to want to be on the wrong side of history during that time. I guarantee that. Okay? Because if you are, when God judges you, when Jesus judges you, it's not going to be a pretty sight. Okay? So, let's jump back into this video, picking back up from where we left off. I just kind of wanted to say that I put in a J. Werner Wallace video because I read through most of Cold Case Christianity. I haven't finished the whole book yet. I need to go back and start it again and read through it again. But basically what I've been talking about, J. Werner Wallace in this video that's in the description basically says what I've been saying. That's why I say read Cold Case Christianity, because J. Werner Wallace was not, when he sat down to look at this book, specifically the 4 Gospels, he was an atheist, okay? He was not a Bible-believing, Bible-thumping Christian, okay? He was an atheist, and he was like, I'm going to take a critical look at this thing, because I've heard people say one thing, I've heard people say another, and I just want to know what's true. And so I'm going to take my skills as a cold case homicide detective, and I'm going to apply it. And he kind of talks about that, some of the methodologies that they use when evaluating witness statements and evaluating different things. And one of the things that he says is, he goes, look, an eyewitness may not necessarily be 100% right in every single detail, right? Like, a person may say that guy was wearing a navy blue shirt when in actuality he was wearing, like, a different shade, right? He might have been wearing a dark green shirt, but in the panic of the moment, the person thought it was navy blue, right? Stuff like that. Little minor discrepancies between, like, what the perp was actually wearing and what the person was actually, what the witness thought the perp was wearing and versus what the perp was actually wearing. But he goes, but does that automatically, this is the question that J. Werner Wallace is asking, he says, does that automatically then throw the entire testimony out the window because one guy got one detail wrong or didn't match with another eyewitness statement? And he goes, no, you reconcile everything first, and then sit down and look at the little tiny discrepancies and see if there's something that is completely out of whack, which is what they did with the Gnostic Gospels. That's why we don't accept any of the Gnostic Gospels, folks, because the Gnostic Gospels have no bearing on anything that has to do with Jesus' life and ministry, okay? Because they get details massively wrong. They get a lot of the details of where he was and what he was doing are completely out of alignment with the four Gospels that we have that were written by eyewitnesses. Okay? And so that's the point that he's bringing up in that, is he says, we have these four eyewitness statements, and then we have all these other statements that make no sense when compared with the four eyewitness statements. Because these statements were written centuries later in some cases, but at least decades, like many, many decades, at least hundreds and hundreds of years post Jesus' resurrection, and they get the details wrong on like where things are and what things are happening, and they get details wrong on different things because Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD, okay? And then the diaspora happened, and there was a lot of things happening then, and that's why I'm saying that there was a lot of Paul was writing his letters in the 50s, okay, in the 40s and 50s. He died in the mid-60s, and we'll get into that. But he died in the mid-60s. The rest of our guys, so, and that was about the time that Mark was writing his gospel, Matthew was writing his gospel, and, between 70 and 90 was when John was written. We don't know exactly when it was written, but we know that John, after the diaspora, he went to Ephesus. Okay? And so J. Werner Wallace is talking about this. He says you have Paul in kind of the Asia Macedonia area. You have, actually he was in Rome, and then you have like John. He was in kind of the Ephesus area, kind of Greek area, and then you have Peter, who was down in North Africa. And so he goes, we have these three main witnesses, and then of course you have Matthew, who is kind of in Israel, and so you have at least three main witnesses that have a paper trail that follows them in terms of where their gospels were written, what letters were written by them, where they were from, what they were doing, and we have all of this other information on these guys. And so the burden of proof then falls to the atheist. If they want to say that something doesn't add up, they have to prove those other sources wrong. That's why I'm making this video, and that's why I'm calling Viced Rhino out, and that's why this introduction is kind of long, is because I'm explaining why I'm making this series. Because people like this are bringing up a ton of things that are not true. He is making false claims. He is not providing a single source to back up his claims. He is misrepresenting the Bible and then claiming that it's us Christians who are doing all of the things that he himself is doing. And so we, as Christians, we have to have the discernment to say, no, buddy boy, you're in the wrong. Not us, you. Okay? And that's why I make these videos, is because I want people to know that I am trying my darndest to provide you, the Christian viewer, and you, the atheist viewer, with actual sources that you yourself can look up. That's why I have a description box below that is full of links. Okay? Because I want you, the viewer, to know that I am trying to help you be a better at discernment. Okay? And so that you don't act, if you're an atheist, you don't act as ignorant as this fool. Okay? Because this guy is so ignorant of everything in the Bible, it boggles my mind. It really does. And it just frustrates me because this guy doesn't seem to understand that when you want to make a claim, you have to provide some kind of data and warrant to back it up. Okay? The data is the evidence, the warrant is the why. Okay? So claim, data, warrant. If you're not doing those three things, you're making unsubstantiated claims and saying, trust me, bro. And believe me, for the longest time, okay, I was guilty of that. Okay? As a Christian, I was guilty of that. I didn't know all of the sources I should have known. Okay? I didn't look up a lot of the things I should have known that I do now. Okay? But since I've been in apologetics, I have been studying the scholars. I've been studying the Bible itself. I've been reading through the Bible. I've been, looking at different things. I've been trying to not learn the languages, but at least learn the words and how they work, okay, and what they mean, so that I can give you guys, so that when I'm doing these videos, I'm giving you guys the right context and the right words, okay, so that when an atheist comes along and says, you guys do this all the time, you can say, no, we don't. Not anymore. Now, I'm not saying that this problem is like 100% gone. Sure, there's still a lot of Christians out there that have blind belief, and that's fine. They can have that blind belief if they want. Okay? They sit in the church every single week and they believe that the Bible is true, and they've never done any of this research. They've never looked at any of these type of videos. They take whatever the pastor says on faith. And you know what? That's okay. If they want to live that way, that's fine. But for me, I stand on a mountain of evidence, okay? I stand on a mountain of historical evidence, okay, from guys like the early church fathers and Dr. Jim, shout out to Dr. Jim, who was able to put down some of these words of these early church fathers so that we know, okay, and we have scholars like Philip Comfort and Wes Huff and, Philip Kohlenberger, I think is his name, Kohlenberger. He's a guy that wrote the strongest concordance that I use that's at home. I look at these guys and I say, this is, these scholars have done a lot of the work for me, and now I'm doing that research for you, okay? So that you're armed and ready to go. That's why, okay, I ask this question, how sharp is your sword? Because it's not just how well do you know the Bible, but it's also how well do you know the stories behind the Bible? How well do you know the mountain of evidence that the Bible sits atop? That if there was not this volume of evidence out there, us Christians would be having blind faith like the evolutionists do. Okay? The evolutionists have zero evidence besides lines on paper and bones in the dirt, and that's it. They have zero evidence to back up their theory, but they still believe it is 100% scientific fact. That's fine. They're welcome to believe that. It's their belief. They want to have that belief. That's fine. But my point being that if the Bible was not sitting on top of the mountain of evidence that we have today, okay, us Christians would have a much shakier foundation to stand upon when trying to defend the Bible. Okay? We'd be a lot like the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses when we would go to evangelize to people and people go, well, this says this and this says that. Why do we'd be like, whoa, that's totally different, but it's not. Okay? That's not the way that our faith works. Our faith works because our faith is not blind belief. It's not blind obedience. It is on top of a volume of evidence, a mountain of evidence. Archaeological, historical, anthropological, it's all in there. And we're even starting to discover that there's a lot of scientific facts in the Bible, okay? Like the life is in the blood. Yeah. Okay? So there's a lot of... I'm not going to go into that in this episode because we got to get back into this video. But I just wanted to make sure that you people understood, okay, that this is how things work. When I, as a Christian, am presenting this information to you, I provide the receipts because I want you, the viewer, to know that I'm not like this guy just spouting off a bunch of random nonsense. You can check me. You can't check him because he doesn't bring up a single source. I wonder why not. Now let's jump back in.
So, yeah, all this to say that this view of the miracles of Jesus is exclusive to the book of John, with the other three Gospels explicitly saying that no sign will be given, which suggests that Jesus would have had different purposes for performing his miracles. Like, maybe he healed people just because he had compassion for them. Maybe he multiplied the loaves and fish because he just didn't want to see people go hungry. That sounds like a much better Jesus than the "look at how amazing I am" Jesus that we find in John.
Cool story, bro. Do you have a story? Do you have a source to back up that story? No? Oh. Okay. I thought you were better sourced than the Bible. Fail. Again. Oh, and to be sure, the feeding of the 5,000 is in all four Gospels. We'll start in Matthew. And it's Matthew 14. So, essentially, John the Baptist was imprisoned by Herod Antipas because Herod had taken the wife of a brother, I think. Anyway, he was basically living in sin, okay? And John the Baptist called him out about it, so Herod had him imprisoned. And so Salome, the daughter of Herodias, Herod's wife, danced for him, and he said, "I will give you anything." And she says, prompted by her mother in verse 8, give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist. So he has John the Baptist beheaded. And then they tell Jesus in verse 12, John's disciples take John the Baptist's body and bury it, and then go find Jesus and tell him that John the Baptist is dead. Picking up the story in verse 13, okay. Now when Jesus heard about John, he withdrew from there in a boat to a secluded place by himself. When the people heard of this, they followed him on foot from the cities. When he went ashore, he saw a large crowd and felt compassion for them and healed their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This place is desolate, and the hour is already late. So send the crowds away, that they may go into villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Ordering the people to sit down on the grass, he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, he blessed the food, and breaking the loaves, he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. They picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 full baskets. There were about 5,000 men who ate, besides women and children. Okay? This, outside of the resurrection, this is one of the other most well-documented miracles in the Bible, is the feeding of the 5,000, because it's in all 4 Gospels. Okay? Now, Mark 6 tells the story. Okay? Let me see here. 30 through 44. Okay. So it says, the apostle gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that they had done and taught. So this is after he had sent out the 12, and then Jesus was by himself. John the Baptist is still beheaded at the beginning of Mark 6, and then the apostles come back to him, and he says, "Come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest a while, for there were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat." They went away in a boat to a secluded place by themselves. The people saw them going, and many recognized them and ran there together on foot from all the cities and got there ahead of them. When Jesus went ashore, he saw a large crowd and felt compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. When it was already quite late, his disciples came to him and said, "This place is desolate and is already quite late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding countryside and villages to buy themselves something to eat." And he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and spend 200 denarii on bread and give them something to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go look." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. And he commanded them all to sit down by groups on the green grass. They sat down in groups of hundreds and of fifties. And he took the 5 loaves and of the 2 fish, and looking towards heaven, he blessed the food and broke the loaves, and he kept giving them to the disciples to set before them, the crowd, and he divided up the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up 12 full baskets of broken pieces and also of the fish. There were 5,000 men who ate the loaves. Okay. Then we go to Luke 9. We'll start in verse 10. When the apostles returned, they gave an account to him of all they had done. Taking them with him, he withdrew by himself to a city called Bethsaida. But the crowds were aware of this and followed him, and welcoming them, he began speaking to them about the kingdom of God and curing those who had need of healing. Now, the day was ending, and the 12 came to him and said to him, "Send the crowd away, that they may go into the surrounding villages and countryside and find lodging and get something to eat, for here we are in a desolate place." But he said to them, "You give them something to eat." And they said, "We have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless perhaps we go and buy food for all these people." For there were about 5,000 men. And he said to his disciples, "Have them sit down to eat in groups of about 50 each." They did so, and had them all sit down. Then he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed them and broke them, and kept giving them to the disciples to set before the people. And they all ate and were satisfied, and the broken pieces which they had left over were picked up, 12 baskets full. And it happened that while he was praying alone, the disciples were with him, and he questioned them, saying, "Who do the people say I am?" And then it goes on from there. Okay. And then in John chapter 6, we read this story, I believe it was in the last episode. Okay. This was the Bread of Life discourse, basically. Essentially, so basically, this whole story is there. After these things, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, or Tiberias. A large crowd followed him because they saw signs which he was performing on those who were sick. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Therefore Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing that the large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat?" He was saying this he was saying to test him, Philip, for Jesus himself knew what he was intending to do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for everyone to receive a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are these for so many people?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in that place. So the men sat down, in number about 5,000. Jesus then took the loaves, and having given thanks, he distributed to those who were seated, and likewise also the fish as much as they wanted. And when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments so that nothing will be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. Therefore, when the people saw the sign which he had performed, they said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." And then basically, Jesus went up to a mountain by himself to pray in verse 15. Okay. So again, we have this miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 in all 4 gospels. And the telling of it, there's little tiny discrepancies between, like, Jesus asked Philip and John. In other ones, they're like, send the disciples come up and send the people away. So there's little tiny discrepancies. Okay? But this guy seems to not understand that Jesus isn't performing this miracle okay, as some compassionate act. Yes, it says he was filled with compassion for the people, but the disciples were saying essentially the same thing. They said, send these people away because they're getting hungry, it's getting late. They can go and they can, buy food, stay in an inn, do whatever they need to do. And Jesus is like, nah, what have you got here? And he feeds them all with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Okay? So, again, the same miracle recorded in all 4 Gospels. Hey, Viced Rhino, are you sure you know what you're talking about? Because it doesn't seem like it to me, son.
Though, to be sure, the synoptic Jesuses certainly aren't without their problems as well.
Jesus not only exhibited power.
Like? Another claim, another shift was 0 evidence. What was so bad about Jesus in the synoptic Gospels? I don't understand. This guy really doesn't know the Bible. Claim, data, warrant. You made the claim that the synoptic Jesus, the synoptic gospel Jesus, has problems. What problems are you talking about, son? Because the synoptic gospels Jesus is the same as John's Jesus, as we'll see in a bit. Okay? Again, fail.
Power over the sick and diseased, he also showed his superiority over nature more than once. He calmed the Sea of Galilee during a turbulent storm.
Okay, I literally just skipped him listing a bunch of Jesus healing miracles, and I'm leaving this in because it's relevant to his point, but I'll probably skip the rest of what he lists. Remember, this is reason 2, and the reason is that the miracles were varied. So, he healed people, and he also calmed a storm, allegedly. According to non-eyewitnesses, who, at best, are relaying third-hand accounts of the events in question decades after the fact.
Again, this guy's making this claim. Non-eyewitness accounts. Do you have any evidence to back that claim up there, Viced Rhino? At all? Ever? Let me give you the answer. Nope. Because there is no evidence that these are third-hand accounts or non-eyewitness accounts. The 4 Gospels that we have, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are eyewitness accounts. Okay? Now, one could make the claim that the only one that's not a true eyewitness account would be Luke, because Luke wasn't actually there. Okay? But he was interviewing the eyewitness. The only one that you could possibly make that claim with would be Luke. But even then you'd be wrong, because Luke was interviewing the surviving when he was writing his gospel, because Paul was in Rome in chains, and Luke was sent by Paul to Jerusalem, okay, or to the Jews, the church at Jerusalem, and said, interview as many of the surviving disciples as you can and get their version of events to help my claim. And he did. Okay? He went back, he sailed back, he carried some of Paul's letters with him, okay? And he gave some of those letters to those churches, stopped off in Jerusalem, and, got all of his things, compiled his documents, got back out, and then sailed back, grabbed some other replies, and then went back and saw Paul and was like, here's all this documentation. Okay? So, again, see the links to the Dr. Jims below. Okay? Because the Dr. Jims are people that are talking about these Gospels long before any of the Gnostic Gospels were written. There was already heresy happening, but there was no, like, the Gospels, the Gnostic Gospels hadn't been written yet. Okay? When, like, Irenaeus was doing his things, there were some heretics who were going around and saying things like Jesus was just a man, he wasn't divine. Okay? There were some heretics walking around saying untrue things. But those type of things did not get written down until the late 100s to early 200s. That's when the Gnostic Gospels show up for the first time. Okay? And by that time, the original apostles, the actual eyewitnesses, were long dead at that point. And now these people were like, hey, we can write a bunch of our heresies into gospel accounts and we'll spread them around to the other churches. And so they started doing that. Those heresies have been around for a long time. There were people who were trying to say Jesus was just a man, he wasn't truly divine, or, you know, he had, like, when you hear in the Gospels it says, my beloved son, he, you know, God the Father is just giving Jesus the Holy Spirit. It's kind of what fuels the belief of Islam in that way, okay? Where they believe Jesus was a prophet, not an actual, like, son of God, okay? So, the thing is that this is evidence, Dr. Jim's, okay? This is actual evidence that the Gospels were written by eyewitnesses, okay? This guy hasn't brought up a single point yet that he has been able to back up at all, okay? None whatsoever, okay? Because the evidence that I have, this guy is either A, completely unaware of, B, willingly ignorant of, or C, hand-waving said evidence away to make his own claim seem legit. I'll let you be the judge. Because we know that the accounts written in this book are eyewitness accounts. The burden of proof is on you, Viced Rhino, to show how your claim is the truth and not our claim. And you haven't done that. Okay? The only evidence that you've brought up so far in this, like, 12 to 13 minutes here of this video is, trust me, bro, that's it. That's your opinion, son, not fact. So, again, good luck with that.
Reason 2 suffers from exactly the same problem as Reason 1. If I don't believe that the miracles happened in the first place, explaining that you can find a variety of the miracles that I don't believe happened is not going to convince me that they happened. Harry Potter spells come in a wide variety of categories. That doesn't make them real. Unless, of course, you need to stop the Carrionites from escaping and wreaking havoc on the universe.
Bernie's light and Tinker's cause, I say to thee! Ah! JK!
Oh, that clip didn't age well, did it? Has anyone informed JK that logging off of Twitter and just enjoying her unfathomable wealth is an option for her?
Again, we have the appeal to a fictional story fallacy. The presupposition being that I don't believe these stories are true, therefore they must be fiction. Isn't an argument, son. Okay? It is also an equivocation fallacy. Since Viced Rhino here is ignoring centuries of historical, archaeological, and anthropological evidence of the Bible, and failing to provide one single iota of fact to back up the spurious claims that he's making. You failed again, Mr. Better Sourced. And also, This is what I mean by smug arrogance. Okay? This picture right here. This is smug arrogance. Oh! And the same thing that you projected onto JK applies to you. In this instance, you can hop off YouTube anytime, buddy boy. Well, go live your life quietly in the country. Go find a job that actually requires you to do something other than, say, trust me, bro. Like being a waiter. Nice and factual. Then you might understand the difference between fact and fiction, son. Can't you imagine it? No, sir, you ordered the steak. No, I ordered the chicken. No, you ordered the steak. Trust me, bro. It'd be like, Viced Rhino, you're fired.
Such a great demonstration of power over death caused many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things Jesus did to believe in him.
Okay. So, John 11. Let's take a look. So, basically, this is the story of, basically, the death and resurrection of Lazarus, right? Lazarus was a relative of Jesus, as was Mary and Martha. This isn't Mary Magdalene. This is the other Mary. So there was like 4 Marys in Jesus's story. There was Mary, the mother of Jesus, okay? There was Mary Magdalene, okay? There was Mary, the sister of Martha and sister of Lazarus. And then there was Mary, the wife of Clopas. Okay? It can sometimes get confusing as to which Mary they're talking about. So, in John 11, this is Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. Okay? So, basically, it says, basically, like, Jesus hears that Lazarus is sick. I'm going to sum up, and I'm going to start in verse 30 of chapter 11, okay? And then I'm going to read through about, I might just read through the end of the passage, just because I think it'll probably be easier that way. But I'm going to sum up the first part of the passage here. So Jesus is out walking around, and with his disciples, and it's important why I set up the whole relation between Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. They're related to Jesus, okay? It's important. We'll get to that in a minute, okay? Because essentially, Jesus is out walking around, and Mary and Martha send a runner, a messenger, to Jesus. Says, hey, come quick. You know, Mary and Martha say, come quick, because Lazarus is sick, and they'd like you to come and heal him. And he flat out says, no. And he says it's not to end in death, but for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it. Okay, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews are just going to seek to stone you. You're going there again. And he's like, yeah, no. So then he says in verse 11, Lazarus has fallen asleep. That is a euphemism for death. It's all throughout the Bible, okay? And he goes, let us go so that I may awaken him. So, they're not understanding the euphemism. They're like, well, if he's fallen asleep, he'll just get better, right? And Jesus is like, no, he's dead. Okay. So Jesus, so verse 14, Jesus said, Lazarus is dead. And then he says, it is for your sakes that I'm glad that we were not there, meaning that they were not at Lazarus' house, so that you may believe. Okay? He's essentially going to raise Lazarus from the dead, perform this miracle in front of his disciples so that they understand exactly who he is. Okay? So then Martha, when she heard that Jesus was coming, runs out to meet him. Okay? And she's like, you should have been here. If you'd been here, Lazarus would still be alive. He wouldn't have died. And he'd been in the tomb for 4 days at this point. Okay? So he was dead. Okay? Then he says, your brother will rise again. She said, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. 25. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She says, yes, Lord. Okay? So then he says, so then after he tells her this, she runs back and says, Mary, the teacher's coming. Come on. I'm going to start in verse 30 here. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but he was still in the place where Martha had met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and consoling her, when they saw that Mary got up quickly and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Therefore, when Mary came to Jesus, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit and was troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. Shortest verse in the Bible. 36. So the Jews were saying, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man also from dying? So Jesus, again, being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you believe you will see the glory of God? So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but because of these people standing around I said it, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. The man who had died came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Therefore many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he had done believed in him. That's the verse on the screen. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them the things which Jesus had done. Therefore the chief priests and the Pharisees convened a council, and were saying, what are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. Oh, how would the Pharisees have known that? If the people had been following Jesus' actual advice and not talking about the miracles, how would the Pharisees have known that Jesus was performing all these miracles? You see how dumb that argument sounds? If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you take into account that it is expedient for you that one man die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish. Now, he did not say this on his own initiative, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but in order that he might also gather together into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So from that day on, they planned together to kill him. Therefore, Jesus no longer continued to walk publicly among the Jews, but went away from there to the country near the wilderness, into a city called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up to Jerusalem out of the country before the Passover to purify themselves. So they were seeking for Jesus, who was saying, and were saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think, that he will not come to the feast at all?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given order that if anyone knew where he was to report it, so that they might seize him. So here we have the crowd expressing belief. Okay? And the funniest thing is that this guy said no one in the crowd thought to, say anything and then write it down. I mean, that would be like saying because the soldiers at Gettysburg, okay, every single soldier at Gettysburg didn't write an account of the battle there, it didn't happen. Though we know it happened, right? Like, that's the point.
Oh, fancy that. The Bible verse about his miracles converting people came from John, not one of the synoptics.
So, you need proof that Jesus' miracles in the synoptic gospels converted people. Okay. Matthew 4. Let's do it this way then. You wanted the proof, son. Here it comes. You're going to look pretty stupid after this. Matthew 4, 23 through 25. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and the people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. (8) 14 through 17. When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and carried our diseases. Verse 9, chapter 9, 1 through 8. Jesus stepped into a boat, crossed over, and came to his own town. Some men brought him a paralytic lying on a mat. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Take heart, son, your sins are forgiven." At this, some teachers of the law said to themselves, "This fellow is blaspheming." Knowing their thoughts, Jesus said, "Why do you entertain evil thoughts in your hearts? Which is easier to say, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up and walk'? So that you may know the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." Then he said to the paralytic, "Get up, take up your mat, and go home." And the man got up and went home. When the crowd saw this, they were filled with awe, and they praised God who had given such authority to men. 18 through 26. While he was saying this, a ruler came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her, and she will live." Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Just then a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him, touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, "If only I touch his cloak, I will be healed." Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said. "Your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed from that moment. When Jesus entered the ruler's house and saw the flute players and noisy crowd, he said, "Go away, the girl is not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him. After the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by the hand as she got up. News of this spread through all that region. Oh, I'm sorry, what were you lying? Matthew 20, 29 through 34. As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do?" He asked. "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. 28. After the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord had come down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." So the women hurried away from the tomb, yet afraid, yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Jesus suddenly met them. Excuse me. "Greetings," he said. And they came and clasped his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers. Go to Galilee there, and they will see me." While the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests had met with the elders to devise a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And the story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. Then the 11 disciples went into Galilee to a mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth is given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age." Okay. Mark 1, 21 through 28. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching, because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Just then a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," said Jesus sternly. "Come out of him." The evil spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. The people were all amazed, so they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching and with authority. He even gives orders to evil spirits, and they obey him." News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand, touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cured. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to a priest, and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. "Oh, what were you lying? Son, you said the Synoptic Gospel said nobody was converted by his miracles." People were believing him. What the hell are you talking about, son? It doesn't seem like you have a clue. Hi, Moogie. Oh, you need to stay there. I need to be able to see the paper. Yes, you need to stay there. Okay? Yes, you stay there. Here, I'll move this. You can sit here. Okay? I'll give you my hand for a little bit. Don't bite me, okay? Okay? Please, don't bite me. Alright. Mark 2. Okay? We'll finish up this list. I've got a few verses here in Mark, and then we'll stay. Okay? And then we'll call it an episode. Okay, 2. A few days later, Jesus again entered Capernaum, and the people heard that he had come home. This is 1 through 12. So many gathered there that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them. some men came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus, and after digging through it, lowered the mat the paralyzed man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some teachers of the law were sitting there, thinking to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this is what they were thinking in their hearts, and he said to them, sorry, his tail is weird. And he said to them, "Why are you thinking these things? Which is easier to say to the paralytic?" Oh, darn cat. Which is easier to say to the paralytic, "Your sins are forgiven," or to say, "Get up, take up your mat, and walk"? But you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He said to the paralytic, "I tell you, take up your mat and go home." He got up, took his mat, and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." Okay? 3, 7 through 12. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard that all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, he told the disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him, for he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Whenever the evil spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God," but he gave strict orders not to tell who he was. Did they listen? No. Okay. 5, 1 through 20 is the healing of a demon-possessed man in the region of the Gerasenes. And I'm going to read 18 through 20, okay? Because basically he pulls out the thing. We're going to get into the story a little bit later, because he's going to make a stupid claim about it. And basically, like, Jesus pulls the demon out of the man and lets them go into the herd of pigs, and then the herd of pigs run down off the hill and into the water and drown, and the pig herders run into town and are like, "Guys, dude, there's the guy that was out there in the tombs that was like breaking chains and like we couldn't hold him and stuff. He's healed. Like, there's this guy who did it." And then they run out there and they see the dead pigs and they see the guy and they're like, "Could you please leave?" So as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done, and all the people were amazed. Again, "Son, what were you lying?" And then the story of the dead girl and the sick woman, which was the same one that we read in Matthew 9. Jairus, the healing of Jairus' daughter, and the woman comes up and touches him. And he does it in full view of the crowds, right? Okay? The woman with the bleeding condition was literally healed. And like it was in the middle of a crowd of people, and they believed that he did it. 6:30 through 44 is the feeding of the 5,000 miracle, because there was 5,000 people there. 8, 1 through 13 is Jesus feeding the 4,000. There was 4,000 people there. 10, 46 through 52 is about blind Bartimaeus. Then they came to Jericho as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, that is the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "The Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped up to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight, and followed him along the road. Okay? And then 16:1 through 20 is the resurrection. And, again, it's like, they saw all that stuff. Okay, and then Luke, starting in verse 4, or chapter 4, sorry, 31 through 37. It says, "Then he went down to Capernaum, a town in Galilee, and on the Sabbath began to teach the people. They were amazed at his teaching because the message had authority. In the synagogue there was a man possessed by a demon, an evil spirit. And he cried out at the top of his voice, 'Ha, what do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God.' 'Be quiet,' said Jesus. Jesus said sternly, 'Come out of him.' Then the demon threw the man down before them all and came out without injuring him. All the people were amazed and said to each other, 'What teaching? With authority and power he gives orders to evil spirits, and they come out.' And the news about him spread throughout the surrounding region." Okay? 38 through 44. Jesus left the synagogue and went to the home of Simon. Now Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked Jesus to help her. So he bent over her and rebuked the fever, and it left her. She got up and began to wait on them. When the sun was setting, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness. Laying his hand on each one, he healed them. Moreover, the demons came out of many people, shouting, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak, because they knew he was the Christ, or Messiah. At daybreak, Jesus went out to a solitary place. The people were looking for him, and when they came to where he was, he tried to keep from leaving them. But he said, "I must preach the good news of the kingdom of God to the other towns also, because that is why I was sent." And he kept on preaching. Let me see here. 5:12 to 16, which is the man with leprosy. While Jesus was out in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. He saw Jesus, fell to his face on the ground, and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, make me clean." "I am willing, be clean." Then he said, "Don't tell anyone, but offer the sacrifices to Moses." And the guy went out and preached to him, so that crowds came to hear him and to be healed of their sickness. Okay, and then 5:17 through 26, which is the healing of the paralytic, which is the one where they dig down through the roof and they drop him down. And then it says everyone, in verse 26, says everyone was amazed to give praise to God. They were filled with awe and said, "We have seen remarkable things today." Let me see here. 11 through 17. Soon after, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went with him. As he approached the town, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother. She was a widow, and a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, he went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." When he went up and touched the coffin to those carrying it, he stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They, the crowd, were filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." This news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. 8:26 through 39. Is the healing of the demon-possessed man, which is the Gerasenes. Okay. I'll start in verse 38. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go away with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell how much God has done for you." So the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. And then, of course, in 40 through 56, dead girl and a sick woman. 9, 10 through 17, the feeding of the 5,000. 40 through 56. which is the healing with a boy. It says, well, I'll start in verse 37. The next day when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met him. A man in the crowd called out, "Teacher, I beg you, look at my son, for he is my only child." Spirit seizes him, and he suddenly screams. It throws him into convulsions so that he foams at the mouth. It scarcely ever leaves him and is destroying him. I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they could not. "O unbelieving and perverse generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." Even while the boy was coming, the demon threw him to the ground in a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the evil spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And they, the crowd, were all amazed at the greatness of God. While everyone was marveling at all that Jesus did, he said to his disciples, "Listen carefully to what I am about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men." But they did not understand what this meant. It was hidden from them, so that they did not grasp it. And they were too afraid to ask him about it. And then, let me see here. 37 through 45, that was that story. And then 13, 10 through 17, which I believe was the feeding of the 4,000. No, that was the crippled woman healed on a Sabbath. On a Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues, and a woman was there who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." Then he put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. Indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, the synagogue ruler and the people said, "There are 6 days for work. So come and be healed on those days and not on the Sabbath." The Lord said to him, answered him, the Pharisee, "You hypocrites, don't each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or donkey from the stall and let it out to give it water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her?" When he said this, all his opponents were humiliated, but the people, the crowd, were delighted with all the wonderful things he was doing. OMG, would you look at that. 17, 11 through 19. That was, now on the way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." As they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, for he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." Because they were praising God in the middle of a crowd. This is the reason why I said that. And then Luke 24 basically is the resurrection story. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but essentially Luke 24 is the resurrection story. So there's like the guys on the road to Emmaus, there was the women, there was all of the disciples that saw him. Luke says that there was a crowd of about 120 that saw him. So there's a bunch there. So again, tell me you've never read the Bible without telling me you've never read the Bible. I mean, this guy has no freaking clue what he's talking about. Because if he had actually read the Bible, he would know that there were plenty of stories like this. Okay? There were plenty of stories like this, where the people saw him doing the miracles and were like, "Whoa, who is this guy?" And they believed in him, or they followed him. Why do you think he was surrounded by crowds the whole time, dude? Have you never seen a Jesus film? Like, literally, in every single Jesus movie, they literally have him followed around by tons and tons of crowds of people. Okay? Hey, no biting. No. No. You don't bite. So anyway, that is the point, folks. Okay? Is that I literally showed a ton of verses where crowds literally either saw the miracles or heard about the miracles, okay, and believed in this fellow Jesus and sought him out, okay, because they were like, "Whoa, who is this guy that's doing all this stuff? We don't know. Let's go find him." So, yeah, this guy, okay, Viced Rhino, has no idea what the hell he's talking about. Okay? Smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, let me know what you thought of this video series so far. And as we say, we will see you on the next one.